Hello everyone, I'm Vlad Shoots History. Today I want to discuss a difficult topic. I've really thought a lot about it. Before making this video, I went to research various sources from experts, even less experienced people on forums. What really stood out is that yesterday, compared to when I'm recording this video, though it may not be yesterday for you, at the range, I had a chat with an expert for a moment. He was a high-level sports shooter, as well as a commander of the local police anti-terrorist forces, so someone who probably knows his stuff about weapons. Among other topics, the discussion was about whether revolvers are obsolete. And actually, it's a topic that seems to continually come up in the world of the firearm user and owner community. After all, my comments are full of people who, for example, praise revolvers, and unfortunately also people who have quite a few misconceptions about revolvers. So let's try to deconstruct the problem and go into detail now, and try to answer this question: are revolvers obsolete or not? First of all, I believe there is a fundamental difference to be made between military use and civilian use. For military use, revolvers are undoubtedly obsolete. All armies have made this transition. This has been the case since 1900, when Switzerland adopted the Luger, and includes the adoption of famous pistols like the Colt 1911. In 1911, and for some nations, even beyond the period between the two world wars. Nearly everyone now uses semi-automatics instead of revolvers. Today, no army issues revolvers as standard, only semi-automatics. And the occasional general who carries a revolver as a ceremonial weapon is an absolute exception. No one on the modern battlefield uses revolvers, and there are many good reasons for this. Reasons that, however, in the civilian field are not necessarily true. So the real discussion here, in my opinion, is in the civilian field. Revolvers are outdated for civilians and definitely for military use. There are various pros and cons to revolvers compared to semi-automatics, and I believe these are things to consider very carefully, especially if you're not just an enthusiast watching this video, but you are people who seriously use a gun for work, as a security guard or similar. First, let's discuss capacity. Modern 9mm semi-automatics have many more rounds than a revolver. A typical revolver will have 5 or 6 rounds, while a modern semi-automatic we're looking at around 15s. That's a big difference, almost triple the capacity. On the other hand, most cases of civilian gun use are, for example, American police statistics. They tell us that in the vast majority of cases, when a civilian uses a weapon, they fire 2 shots. Rarely do they fire 3, and almost never more than 3. So it seems to us that the 5 or 6 shot capacity of the revolver is absolutely more than sufficient in the vast majority of cases. On the other hand, those who favor the semi-automatic because it has more shots present the argument that yes, it's true that the vast majority of cases are resolved with 2 or 3 shots. But I don't want to entrust my life to a statistic. I don't want to be that 1% of cases where I need more shots to resolve the situation. It's already rare to have to use a gun. It's even rarer that I'll have to use a gun to fire 2 or 3 shots. But I want to bet my life on the rarity of the situation. Many just say no to this question, even though most people who own a weapon will luckily never have to use it in their life. They are not willing to bet their own life. Even in the rare case that they have to use more than 2 or 3 shots. And this is where the game of transporting and reloading ammunition comes into play. Revolvers are damn hard to reload, especially under stress, and there is no, let's say, convenient way to transport ammunition. A magazine can be tucked somewhere in a belt in a special holster, while with revolvers you apparently have to have the bullets scattered. Or at most the little moon clips, which are still not very comfortable to carry. They still flap around, they move in a pocket. The practical truth of reloading with a revolver versus a semi-automatic absolutely favors the semi-automatic. We are not certain champions like Jerry McCulloch, what's his name, who can reload a revolver in half a second. And the truth is that it's much easier not only to reload a semi-automatic, but to train to reload a semi-automatic, because it requires fewer movements, generally less precise and more mechanical movements. Then there's the matter of power and compactness. Usually a revolver, given the same, let's say, dimensions and weight, will be more powerful. It will have a more powerful ammunition compared to a semi-automatic. And this is very much linked to my video, which by the way was very poorly understood by a good part of the viewers on stopping power. That is, does the power of the bullet matter more, or does the capacity matter more of the bullet? And if it's very clear, these statistics that say 2 shots are fired to resolve a situation actually don't take into account the power of the bullet. Because in practical terms, the power of the bullet matters relatively little. It's clear, as many have said, that shooting someone in the arm with a .22 versus a .44 makes a difference. Sure, if a bear is attacking me and I have a 9mm compared to a .44 Magnum, it's better to have the .44 Magnum. Sure, but in reality, the practical act doesn't matter that much. Because shooting a person is shooting a person. If someone claims they carry a .45 for its bigger holes compared to a 9mm, tell them to get shot with a 9mm. Obviously, this is an absurd example, but you understand what I mean? Being hit by a bullet is being hit by a bullet. The placement of this bullet matters much more than its power. So, yes, on one hand, revolvers are more powerful. On the other hand, power doesn't matter as much and capacity is more important, so the semi-automatic would have a certain advantage. However, a topic that always comes up in my comments and drives me crazy with anger. Sometimes it's that many say revolvers are more reliable. And there's only one, not even half true, just 20% true. First of all, we have to break down the very idea of reliability. What is reliability? We could break it down into something like long-term reliability and short-term instantaneous reliability. If I take a semi-automatic, load it and leave it for 20 years in a drawer, I don't really care if after 20 years I pull it out, it might work properly. For example, if a full magazine's spring stays compressed for 20 years, it may lose elasticity and not work properly. Same goes for the firing pin spring. Well, but who leaves a semi-automatic loaded for 20 years somewhere? Revolvers, on the other hand, essentially if we leave them as they are for a long time. Somewhere, unless there is humidity, they shouldn't have problems. And in general, if an old gun is presented to you, the semi-automatic is likely to have problems. The revolver. Usually it has far fewer, but this is only in the case of someone who leaves a gun somewhere, not if the gun is properly maintained. When semi-automatics were first introduced 120 years ago to the public, both military and civilian, they had several issues. Today, modern semi-automatics are extremely reliable. The quality of ammunition has improved dramatically. The quality of weapons has improved dramatically. In my experience, and in the experience of this person I spoke with, there is a key difference between revolver and semi-automatic malfunctions. Also, remember that revolvers can malfunction despite what some may claim. Nonsense, that's the only way to put it. They probably never had to use a revolver for an extended period of time. Revolvers have malfunctions, there's nothing to do about it. They are very open, dirt can get in, anything can get inside. There are many reasons why a revolver can jam. The fundamental difference is what I've found, both in my personal experience and in the experiences of others, is that malfunctions with semi-automatics are very easy to resolve. Most of them. Just rack the gun, or if necessary, remove the magazine and try to rack the gun, pull out something that's jammed. The gun keeps working. I've had 2 revolver malfunctions in my life, one invisible in photos, but there's a 2017 picture from the TSN in Rome. The gun was theirs. And basically at one point the cylinder didn't want to turn anymore, and the cylinder didn't want to come out. Outside. The instructor came, slammed it, but the cylinder wouldn't come out. Still loaded, we returned the weapon to the armory. They slammed it again and again, trying to do everything for the 10 minutes that I witnessed. Nothing, the cylinder just wouldn't open. The following year, 2018, with another revolver, this time the .38 Special, same exact thing. It got resolved, this time by really banging it, but after 5 minutes of banging the cylinder. But in both cases, the operation of a revolver is a matter of you've stopped shooting and you need to go to a gunsmith. I found this opinion online and in conversation, and many share it. When a semi-automatic malfunctions, it's easy to fix in most cases. When a revolver malfunctions, it's a nail in the coffin. Sure, there are very specific situations where revolvers are more reliable. For example, semi-automatics have a problem at short range. That if you press the gun against someone being recoil operated, you could, by pressing the gun on an aggressor, cause the breech to open. And the gun can't fire even a millimeter of movement, and already things inside are not aligned, and it can't fire. While a revolver, of course, if you press its barrel, doesn't have this problem. And I repeat, if someone tells you that revolvers don't jam, they're talking a load of crap. There's no other way to say it. It really irks me. I feel really bad every time I hear or read that revolvers don't malfunction and people who haven't seriously used revolvers. To conclude, let's also consider the issue of practical use. Many of the people who have a gun, unfortunately, do not have adequate training. Sure, there are people, I personally know people who care a lot about the training aspect and approach firearms in an extremely responsible manner, but many others do not do so. There are many people, I have found many, with all due respect to security guards or the police, but I have found many security guards and a lot of police. I've seen at the range that they often have no idea what they're doing. They brought their weapons to work and don't want to spend much. They only fire 50 rounds annually for qualification to improve weapon training. That's all. For me, it's not really the right attitude, but many people who have guns don't have the proper training. And honestly, training a person to use a revolver correctly is in some ways simpler than training them to use a semi-automatic. If we take out things like reloading, for example, but just the idea of pulling it out, aiming and shooting, in some ways revolvers can be simpler. And a person with little training will hardly be able to double the shot or fire these two famous shots. And so perhaps the more powerful ammunition helps. As you see, this is an extremely chaotic discussion. There are many pros and cons to consider. What do I think? I think that revolvers are obsolete. There's no other way to say it, even for civilian use. I understand those who say they prefer revolvers and feel more comfortable with them. Okay, I personally, in my experience, believe that revolvers, even though they can absolutely be useful for defense, are obsolete. Which doesn't mean they don't work, because even a Mosin Nagant is obsolete. But if you want, you can go hunting with it or do anything you want. That doesn't change that the bolt-action rifle is obsolete, even if it's still produced and used. Let's not get confused here about what obsolete means. Can revolvers do their job in a defense context? Absolutely yes, they are obsolete. Absolutely yes. But one does not exclude the other. Hope you enjoyed this confused video. Share your thoughts in the comments. In particular, if you use weapons for work, or have you ever found yourself in a situation where you had to choose between a revolver and a semi-automatic? And which one did you choose and why? As always, thank you for watching this video and see you next time.